General quarters. All hands man your battle stations.
Welcome to WETSU, a Battleship New Jersey podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Spevak, and it's my honor to serve as CEO of the Battleship New Jersey. ELEC 825, the Labor Employer Cooperative of Operating Engineers 825, is today's sponsor. Local 825 still members operated the cranes that removed the battleship's mast and radar and reattached them following dry dock. Today on WETSU, we're giving the people what they want. You asked for him, and here he is, Mr. Ryan Szimanski. Ryan is the Deputy Executive Director for Curatorial and Educational Affairs at the Battleship New Jersey. He's our curator. He's one curator size tall. He hosts the 271,000 subscriber Battleship New Jersey YouTube channel. In July, Ryan celebrated his 19th anniversary working on museum ships. A graduate of UMBC with an undergraduate degree in history and a minor in Asian studies, his parents told him to get a job to help pay for college. And in July 2006, he started working for the USS Constellation Museum as a part-time tour guide. When the museum became part of Historic Ships in Baltimore and merged with other museum ships, Ryan worked as a tour guide, as the overnight manager, the collections manager, and in charge of maintenance. There isn't much Ryan hasn't done on museum ships. In Baltimore, he also worked on the dry docking of the Coast Guard cutter Taney and the USS Constellation. In 2013, Ryan started going to HINSA conferences, paying his own way. There, he met Jason Hall, then the curator of the Battleship New Jersey, and struck up a friendship. In 2017, Jason called Ryan and told him about his unfortunate cancer diagnosis. He'd be leaving the ship and encouraged Ryan to apply to succeed him. He's been here ever since. Sadly, our friend Jason Hall succumbed to cancer shortly thereafter, and we at the Battleship miss him dearly. In 2020, Ryan and our Director of Curatorial and Education, Libby Jones, started this YouTube channel to keep educating the public during the COVID-19 lockdown. 270,000 subscribers later, here we are. Finally, from 2021 to 2025, Ryan also served as the Executive Director of HINSA, the Historic Naval Ships Association. Ryan, welcome to WETSU.
Thanks for having me, Marshall. Happy to be here.
Normally, I start this and I ask, why did you join the Navy? So let me just rephrase that a little bit and say, why did you start working in museum ships?
When I turned 16, my parents told me, you're going to college, you're going to pay for it yourself, get a job this summer. So I'm sitting there asking myself, what I can't even flip a burger. I can't get a job at McDonald's. What am I supposed to do? So I started working on museum ships, thinking that would help me in an application to the Naval Academy in a year or two. Somewhere along the way, I decided that I absolutely hate modern warships. They're ugly. They've got none of the charm that World War II vessels like this one have. And then many, many years later, I realized that, wait a minute, there are other people my age who are making a career out of working on these ships, what I've been doing part-time for fun on the weekends, and been here ever since.
Well, I mentioned in your intro, all the different jobs that you had sort of along the way. Can you tell us a little bit about how some of those jobs prepared you for what you're doing now?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The reason that Phil and Jason were interested in me for this job as a 27-year-old know-nothing from Baltimore was that I had worked on Constellation in dry dock, and they knew that redecking New Jersey was going to be happening very soon. So the woodworking skills I'd had would help with that. And they knew that dry docking New Jersey was going to come at some point in the near future. Jason told me when he started that I had to figure out a way to convince the museum to do it in the next 5 years. And it was totally possible, and it would be great. It ended up taking 6 years, but there was a pandemic in there. But yeah, those two experiences, I think, are what really helped me get this job.
And we mentioned you previously were on the team that dry docked Taney and the Constellation. What lessons did you take from helping to be part of the team that dry docked those ships? So not a battleship, but what lessons did you take from there that you were then able to apply to our project here last year?
It's incredible how many things are the same, even though those ships are significantly smaller, and one of them was made entirely out of wood. It's amazing how much crossover knowledge there was, such as the day that you dry dock a ship, it will always rain. Every single one I've done. Lots of things. A lot of the things that we were looking for, especially with Taney, which was built in the exact same dry dock as New Jersey, just 4 years earlier, and then serves up until 1986 with very parallel life to this ship. A lot of the problems that we've had with her were things that we knew to look for on New Jersey, and at least say,
hey, are the propeller shafts intact because Tannies were leaking? Is the cathodic protection intact because Tannies has been largely consumed over time? So even though in some of those instances we looked and we found that there wasn't an issue here yet, in some of those instances we were like, oh yeah,
you knew it's
exactly.
So going back to when you first started here, it was December 2017, January 2018. What was the state of the battleship, of upkeep, maintenance, all that kind of stuff when you first started here?
I would say that the history of the battleship has been a series of ups and downs with like lots of people coming and visiting and then consequently having a lot of staff hired and then stuff slowing down and staff being laid off. So when they hired me, they had been at a lower place where Jason was the only employee for the entire curatorial and education department. In fact, the curatorial department and the education department, which had been separate, were merged together under him so they could reduce the staffing. So the museum was on the right trajectory and we're starting to hire more people and do more things. But it's been really incredible seeing that happen.
And from just a less more about the ship itself, less maybe about the organization, what was the status of how the ship looked?
Honestly, she didn't look bad for a museum ship. I've worked on quite a few, and New Jersey didn't look terrible. But, looking back on her now, after all the work that you and I and the rest of the team here have done over the last couple of years, you wouldn't recognize her. The tour route was significantly smaller. The hull had running rust and flaking paint. She hadn't ever been dry docked as a museum. The deck, there was grass growing in the deck. It was mulch. It wasn't safe for people to walk on in some places. We had sections closed off.
Libby's Zen garden was a lot bigger with all the grass growing through it.
Yeah.
That's what you wanted to say, I know. So I mentioned your friendship with Jason, how you came to work here at the ship. Can you tell us just a little bit about your first days on board and some of the things that you were doing back then on a daily basis?
So Jason had gotten a cancer diagnosis, and they had told him that he had about 5 years left to live. So he had planned on working for 2 years and then retiring and traveling some, and then spending his last year or two at home doing hospice sorts of things. But 2 weeks before I started working here, after I'd already moved from Baltimore to Philadelphia, he had seizures over the Christmas holiday. And so when I started working here, we had no idea what his status was. I showed up on my very first day. Well, my very first day was working New Year's Eve fireworks, coldest day of my life. Did that, showed up the next morning, which was supposed to be my first day, and Jason wasn't here. And the security guard, who are you? And nobody else was here because everybody had been here until midnight the night before for the fireworks. So I eventually talked my way through the guard, found my way to Jason's office, which of course was locked. Unfortunately, I'd visited the ship a couple of times. And there was no one here to show me. Eventually, I was able to break open a door into an office that had been abandoned for a couple of years, but it had some tour guide manuals and things in it. So I started reading the ship's history and that sort of stuff. And a couple of days later, everybody came back from the holiday vacations and started giving me directions on what to do, like where we stored our collections.
Important things to know.
Yeah. And it's worth pointing out, Jason was legally blind. It was something that progressively got worse. But because he wasn't fully sighted, he didn't store things in a way that was logical to us. He stored things in a way that he could absolutely find it. It always amazed me when I visited him in his office. He could walk over to a pile and grab something. It was exactly what you would ask for. When I walked into his office, I did not have that luck. So I spent a large part of probably my first 6 months working here, just going through the various curatorial spaces and reorganizing things in a way that I could find them and going through piles of stuff and being like, okay, do we really need this paperwork from, Jason had been here for about a decade before I started. Do we really need this paperwork from 5 years ago or 10 years ago, or can we get rid of it?
Fast forward to today, I think there will be a lot of people interested in well, you and I both know that no 2 days are ever the same in the battleship. But I think people would be interested in knowing what the typical day of the curator of the Battleship New Jersey, what does that entail?
I like to show up earlier in the morning than everyone else before the museum is opened. And that gives me a chance to talk with the maintenance folks and the volunteers, because the curator of a museum ship, our main artifact is the ship itself. So it's important for us to catch up with the folks who are doing that maintenance work on your macro artifact. So with the volunteers, I get to work with helping pick out projects and figuring out where we're going to focus our efforts. And with the maintenance guys, we talk about how we're going to do the projects in a way that's least invasive to the ship and least invasive to the tour route. So that's usually how the morning goes. Oftentimes, Libby and I will film that night's video at some point in the morning before the ship opens, and then that gives her time to go back and edit it. A large part of my day is spent at the computer, answering emails, things like that. The number of questions I get about really esoteric things that I'd never thought of. I'm supposed to be the expert who's been doing this for years.
So it's giving you ideas for future videos.
That's the key. People ask how we come up with the ideas for the videos. We haven't come up with ideas since like episode 100. Ever since then, it's been somebody's asked a question in the comment section or somebody shot an email. I was like, well, if I've got to do the research to find this out,
Might as well make a video. Yeah. But I remember very distinctly walking into my office one day. You will be shooting a video of you winding clocks. And I said, well, someone must have asked for it. You had mentioned earlier Jason's comments to you when you first were coming on board about dry docking the ship and your previous experience with Canadian Constellation. But it really didn't come to fruition until June 2023 when we received the state appropriation for $5 million. That really kicked this project off in earnest and allowed us to go out and raise the remainder of it. Do you remember your reaction when you heard we got the money and that dry docking this battleship was actually going to happen?
I honestly don't remember my reaction. When I get that ecstatic, it just all goes blank.
We spent obviously several months really in depth in the planning process of the various movements of the ship, the shipyard work. Can you talk to us about some of the things that you did, sort of your role in prepping the ship to move and to head into dry dock?
My biggest concern was the ship hadn't moved in something like 30 years. So, or 20 years, but she hadn't really done much for 30. So I was really worried as we're towing the ship out, moving her, that we might start to get leaks in some of the places that I had seen on, quite frankly, older, smaller, thinner skin ships that I'd worked on. So it was really important to me to set up a team to go below decks and check all the spaces. We had done that when Taney went into dry dock. There were 4 of us, and we had like 18 tanks to check and a couple of lower spaces. So we sort of quartered the ship. New Jersey has something like 800 spaces below the water line. So it was very much, okay, all of these spaces could flood and we would still stay afloat. This is the one where I think it could be a problem. And this is the one where if it does flood, that's going to cause us some serious issues. So we divided up who was going to go where, made sure we had the 2-man rule, knowing that we weren't going to have lights on board, made sure we had all that. That was for the move of the ship. For the time in dry dock, I got to work with other folks to craft what the major things we were going to focus on were. What are the important projects? When Missouri dry docked over a decade before we did, they spent something like $18 million, $20 million on the project. And here we were a decade later with costs going up and we had half the money to spend. So it was, okay, we can't do everything we want to do. What are the critical things if we're not going to see this again for another 30 years? So it was awesome to be a part of that decision-making process. Humbling too. What experiences do I have to?
And if you're saying that, I'm saying that. I'm certainly saying that coming in as CEO in November of 2023 and frankly, some planning being done, but not a tremendous amount, and trying to figure it all out. And obviously leaning on you and Libby and Jay and some of our consultants to help us along the way was an experience. And we all learned it together, which was nice. I think for me, the movements of the ships and being on board the ship was certainly, I got to say, probably some of the highlights of my career, my life. We moved an Iowa-class battleship 4 times, near flawlessly. Was getting underway the first time on the battleship what you hoped for, what you expected?
It was more like the ever imagined. I was down below checking things and I came up on deck and realized that, oh my God, we're already in the middle of the channel. So at some point in the last half hour, we pushed away from the pier and got out here and Captain Benton's already rotating us.
So when we first pushed off, you were below deck.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. I was doing one of the checks and came up. It was like, oh shoot, we're actually moving.
Well, I remember I think I was probably the very last person to come on board that day after the ceremony on the pier, which you probably saw none of, and going up on the high reach onto the ship. And I was still wearing my suit and tie and going into the officer's lounge and trying to change out of it. And when I came out and I was on the main deck, and we were probably 300-400 yards off of, probably less than that actually, off of the pier. And I just looked, I was like, holy shit, this is like happening. And then we start to turn around, and it was a day to remember. It was a cold day, but that was certainly part of the day to remember. But it was, I thought it was everything we had hoped for. And you're right, because when we started planning this, on the later movements, we had more people on board. We sold tickets, we had press and volunteers and things like that. And I remember on the first trip, we said, no, we're not going to do any of that. We just need to make sure we get there, and we'll worry about the rest later. So moving forward to the ship getting to Paulsboro, our first stop on the trip to dry dock. I think one of the things that I know you guys talked about extensively during, at the time on YouTube, but the ballasting. We ballasted, deballasted, we ballasted again, we deballasted again. Can you talk us a little bit about the effort that went into ballasting the ship, our work with Resolve, and how they went and sort of, got the ship trimmed out so we could make it into the dry dock?
Yeah, so we spent years researching what we're going to do, what we have to do, what have other ships done to get a sense of that. And then we move the ship, and the realization hits that now the real work begins. So we get to Paulsboro, and either that same afternoon or very, very early the next morning, the combined team from North Star and Resolve showed up to start the ballasting process. Essentially, Iowa-class battleships have a big armored box around the steering gear back aft that makes them sit about 10 feet lower at the stern than at the bow if they don't have their full fuel and ammunition allotments, as we don't as a museum ship. Missouri might have hers for fighting aliens, but we don't have that.
But we don't talk about that movie here.
So we had to calculate out about 2,000 tons of water into the forward part of the ship in what had been former fuel tanks or void spaces. So we plotted that out. We'd worked with the engineers over at the shipyard where we were going to make sure that we could get her to the point where she'd sit on the blocks. And the folks from Resolve came and made it happen over the course of took about a week to pump the water in. That was an interesting experience. The tanks held water great. The valves and the piping that cross-connected the tanks did not.
Probably could have been worse, though.
It could have been way worse, but we ended up having water moving from some of the tanks we'd intended to some other tanks that we hadn't intended. They were still there for holding water. Just the valves were closed. They just didn't hold anything anymore. So regardless of which tanks the water went into, we got it into all the tanks we needed to get it to the right displacement.
We then go from Paulsboro into dry dock number 3, the fourth time that this battleship has been in dry dock number 3. We went in stern first, which was a unique viewing experience, at least, moving around the Gilliland that was out Pier 6 outside of us, and Joe Bent and his McAllister team, of course, doing the incredible job that they do, pushing us into the dry dock. This ship was on the blocks for 78 days. It would not be a stretch to say that you basically lived at the dry dock for 78 days. I don't think I could get you or Libby to go home. Can you walk us through, I asked you about your typical day on the ship as curator, but can you talk us through your typical day at dry dock number 3 at the Philadelphia Navy Yard?
Yeah, so 2 typical days. There was the typical day where work was happening and the typical day where tours were happening on the weekend.
Give us your typical day of work first, and then we'll talk about tours in a little bit.
Perfect. So first thing in the morning, like 7 or 8 o'clock, we'd all meet with the museum staff and the dry dock staff. We talk about what's going on that day, where we were in the process, all that sort of stuff. Really valuable meeting. I don't generally value daily meetings, but the situation changed so often. It was really useful having these meetings every single day and catching up with everybody and figuring out what the schedule of the day was going to be. From there, we had a little bit of stuff that we were doing with like managing our own contractors, but the large part of it was the quality assurance stuff. They would section out the areas they were going to do, and as they finished sections, representatives from the museum and we all took turns at that, would go down and inspect the work that they had done and sign off that yes, they said they were going to paint this and they have painted it.
You mentioned dry dock tours, a hugely important part of our overall project, and obviously an important source of funding for us while we were closed. Over 6,200 paid tours were given, and frankly, hundreds, probably more people, family, friends, VIPs, officials, Navy folks, who came on board, and everything went off pretty much without a hitch, which is just an incredible feat, that in and of itself. This was basically your and Libby's idea to do these tours and to try to convince the dry dock company, our friends at NASR, to allow us to do this. Did it go off how you imagined it would?
Yes and no. Everything worked the way we expected it to. Crank up to 11. We didn't think we would get that kind of interest. We didn't think we'd be raising that kind of money. We didn't think we'd have that many people coming out. Knowing that we wanted to dry dock the ship, we started to visit other ships in dry dock years before we went in. So we got to see Taney, we got to see Constellation, we got to see Slater, and there are a couple other ones we went to see.
We went to see the USS Texas in February, right before we left.
Texas was the one that they pioneered this idea of doing tours in dry dock. So we got to see what those tours looked like and hear how they did it. And that really helped us craft what we were doing. And I dare say that the precedent of them doing it is what helped convince everybody on our end that it was possible, from the board, who was always supportive of the idea, to the shipyard, who was not always supportive of the idea.
But who later complimented us on how well things went.
Yeah, well, we've no idea how to dry dock a ship, but we know how to give a tour of the ship. That part of the plan was, believe it or not, the easiest thing I think we did.
There's no way I could get through this interview without saying the following words: 2-part cold bonded polysulfide sealant. The perfect example of never knowing what the hell you're going to find on the hull of a battleship. When something like this happens, completely unexpected, you don't even know what the material is that you're looking at. How do you pivot and figure out what to do, how to handle that type of situation for the sealant itself, and then some of the other issues that we then later found?
So when we take the ship out of the water, we find that all of the riveted seams are covered with this caulk compound that's not mentioned in any of the dry dock reports. It wasn't on Missouri when she was dry docked in 2009, and she had been decommissioned in the exact same yard within a year of us being decommissioned. So we had no idea to expect that. And then we found it, and we had no idea how we were going to figure out what it was, why it was. We had a couple of sources, but we'd read them all to prepare for this, and we'd seen nothing at all like that. But part of getting the ship ready for dry dock that we'd been doing for the last 5 years was getting a handle on the collection. The ship came here with a tremendous amount of resources, blueprints, original documents, things like that already on board. And over the 20 some odd years that the ship's been a museum, more have been given to us. And we haven't, even to this day, haven't had a chance to fully catalog them. We're talking about tens of thousands of documents. But prior to dry docking, we at least had a handle on, we've pulled them all into one place. We've organized them so that all the engineering stuff is here and all the gunnery stuff is here. And so we were able to go down, and this was primarily Libby's work. She's the best researcher I've ever met in my whole life. We were able to go down to this space with all these primary resources and go to the dry docking type area and start going through it. And she pulled a document. I'm trying to remember now. It wasn't specifically about it,
but it referenced it in some way.
It said that it had been done to specs according to X manual. So we went over to the other shelf and pulled that manual, and the manual specifically listed up products. So we're like, oh, well, this was 1991. Let's see if that product still exists 30 some odd years later. And sure enough, the same company still manufacturing the same product.
Very thankfully.
Operating engineers are the men and women that move mountains. And the Engineers Labor Employer Cooperative, ELEC, puts them to work. They create opportunities for the men, women, and union signatory contractors of Local 825. Repaving our roads, keeping our homes bright and warm, and even building our favorite team stadium. We understand infrastructure. That's why ELEC and Local 825 are ready to get to work.
We've covered this extensively, but you mentioned earlier in sort of when the question was about, how are we prepping and everything, and being part of the decision making and figuring that out. And I just think back to that time and okay, what's the system of coatings we're going to use, right? What we're going to switch out the anodes from zinc to aluminum. I would venture to say you did make those. I mean, ultimately the buck stops with me, I guess, but I look to you to make those decisions for what you feel was best, especially when it came to, the painting and stuff like that. Because frankly, as we talked about earlier, I didn't have a clue. How did you know that these were the right things for us? How did you figure out that this was the right system of coding? We needed to switch from zinc to aluminum, examples like that.
I had no idea either. But thankfully, I've been around long
It's a common theme that we keep saying, but it all somehow turned out well, right?
Yeah, I'm sure this gives the viewers great confidence in our museum run abilities. So no one person knows it all. But fortunately, through Historic Naval Ships Association and how long we've been around doing this, meeting people, we were able to find other people who had also run into these problems and figured it out, in some instances, the hard way. And so we were able to draw on a tremendous amount of experience from folks from other museum ships and other expertises. Lance Thomas at Anode Solutions has done cathodic protection on a number of museum ships. So we got his advice on what to do there. Texas had just dry docked, worked on other ships in dry dock. So we knew that various paint companies had various systems that worked really well. And we were able to go to them and say, hey, this is what we're looking for. We're permanently moored. We don't need a normal system. We don't need expensive anti-fouling paint. That's not a problem. Give us what you normally paint the inside of a water tank in that's never going to get touched again, because we need something that's going to last a long time.
Well, we get into the dry dock. It took us a little bit longer to pump down the water when we first got in. But then it gets low enough, it gets dry enough, and we see the hull for the first time. You've been working here since 2017. I've been here since 2017 as a board member first, but then even, folks who have been here since, or who are part of the crew, even in the 80s, never saw the underside of the ship. Can you talk to us about the condition of the hull when we first got there, and then also your reaction to the condition of the hull?
Well, after I picked my jaw up, ships are so much like icebergs. I can walk down the pier every day and see the ship and know it's my office building. But you see it out of the water, you finally get an idea of, oh my God, this is 3 times bigger than I ever thought. Fathomably large. It was incredible to stand down that dry dock and look up, and it just fills your field of view for as far as you can see.
I just love doing tours and bringing people down and getting about halfway down the staircase and you said picking your jaw up. I mean, that was the reaction to so many people who didn't realize the enormity of what they were looking at, because all they see is what's above the waterline, which, as you noted, is not even half of the ship. And I remember usually I would go down the staircase first and turn around and then look at the people's reactions when they were.
Love that, because it didn't matter, even if they dry docked ships before or worked on the ship, like you said, members of the ship's crew. It was always that, wow, she's just not built like other ships. She's got those gorgeous sweeping lines. She was designed very much to be a ship of state, to be powerful, and to look good while doing it in a way that, quite frankly, modern ships don't have.
We push away from dry docking for a moment and talk about the curatorial side of things. Just in the calendar year 2025, we've accomplished a tremendous amount of things. We've got our 1911 gun returned to us. Thanks to our friends in the Navy, we now have an RPV Pioneer drone on board, a full complement of 50 cows, original 1980s powder bag. Can you speak to sort of the recent successes we've had here at the Battleship?
I would dare say that the first half of 2025 so far has been the second most successful time period in the museum as far as collections go. The first most successful being when the ship first opens and they had nothing, and somehow they were able to build a museum around this empty ship. I still marvel at the work that had to have happened back then when we were still in grade school. But I'm absolutely blown away by what we have found this year, and it's largely because of the folks who are watching this video right now. We would have never found most of these things on our own. 1911 was tracked down by somebody who watched one of our videos. The drone control radar dome, tracked down by somebody who watched one of our videos. The drone itself, we had multiple viewers who helped us with that. We had a group of viewers who worked for the Navy who had one of those drones where they were and requested to transfer it to us. And they happened to ask somebody who just had a spare in the box laying around waiting. And then another viewer offered to ship it here to us at no cost to the museum. Yeah, it's all happened thanks to crowdsourcing, essentially.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I like to tell people when I give tours is one of the things I love most about the ship is that we either find something new every day, we learn something new every day. Of course, the WETSU flag replica behind me, but finding the original in a black trash bag. And what compartment was it in?
It was in an uptake for the
In an
smokestack.
Smokestack compartment, or the nuclear permission of fire key on a random key ring in the maintenance office. What's your favorite thing that you just happened upon working here?
It's got to be the nuclear launch keys. Just the mind blown of, no, it
This
can't
can't
be.
be.
They wouldn't have let this. What it fits?
That was something special for sure. You know, we mentioned before that, you know, the difference between what the ship looked like when you first started here working here in late 2017 to what it is today. I know over just in the last couple months, we've had a number of active duty Navy personnel on board, multiple flag officers, active duty flag officers, who pretty consistently tell us that the condition of this battleship could rival an active duty Navy ship of any class today. We had some chiefs up here from Mayport the other day when we were down in the engineering room. They couldn't believe how clean our engineering room was. They couldn't believe that actually a lot of the equipment and things that are on this ship that was built in 1940 are still on Navy ships today. And, you know, but just that, hearing that, especially, you know, from folks who are active today, I mean, to me, that's one of the joys of working here, and it makes me tremendously proud for the ship, for our team to keep this ship up. What do those type of comments mean for you?
It's the best evaluation of our work that we could possibly receive. It's hearing that sort of stuff. It's incredible how much everyone around here cares, from, of course, the staff and volunteers who are doing this, but they're not just here to collect a paycheck. They're going above and beyond, like across the board. But even visitors who come on board leave, they might come completely uninterested, and then they leave caring about it. And many of them come back as volunteers or as donors or to another event. It's really incredible.
Stepping back to 2020 for a second, obviously an interesting time in not just here, but in the world. You and Libby decided we're going to start a YouTube channel, and we're going to make some educational videos. We're going to put them out and try to keep some content going and things going for the battleship during that time. Well, flash forward, it's halfway through 2025, a little bit more than that now, and 271,000 plus subscribers later. Can you talk to us a little bit about the evolution of the YouTube channel and the evolution that you and Libby have taken in sort of shaping the YouTube channel from what it was when we started to what it is today?
So we had started talking about doing something like this even before the pandemic started. But obviously, the education department, it's always meant that we're the ones who give tours. 2020, when the museum closes, we can't do that anymore. So we're worried about being laid off. And the museum would have been perfectly correct to lay us off because we couldn't do our normal jobs. So we went to the executive director at the time, Phil, and said, hey, we would like to keep doing our jobs, and we think we can reach even more people this way than we've been reaching with regular tours on board. And he said, oh, that's a great idea. I've heard that there are kids who make millions of dollars on YouTube. Phil, really appreciate the confidence. We're not going to do that, but we will get some advertising out there for the museum, and it won't cost anything. And then when we realized that, yeah, this isn't just we're closed for 2 weeks, we're like, okay, we really have to justify our jobs. We're going to make a video every single night. And so we just started doing that. Some of the early videos we kind of just filmed in my house, talking about like World War II history, that sort of stuff. And then eventually things got to the point where we could come on the ship and film about off the tore out spaces. And there was originally some pushback from staff about that. Like, if we show them videos of these spaces, they'll never come out and see it for themselves. How many times have you seen a picture of the Eiffel Tower? Does that mean you don't want to go to Paris and wait in line and go on the Eiffel Tower? And so we have found that wasn't the case, and that large percentages of the folks who visit the ship now have watched the channel. Yeah. Everybody says the first 1,000 subscribers are the hardest, and that is absolutely true. If it wasn't for folks like Alex at the Drakenfeld channel or him on the museum ships advertising our stuff when we had no subscribers, we would probably still have no subscribers. But between those guys and a couple others, they got us to the point where we had enough that YouTube was like, okay, they're real. Eventually we got to the point where we were able to monetize the videos and get sponsors and things like that. And that's really been transformative for the curatorial department in, at a normal museum. The curatorial department requires a lot of money to do their work, but they don't make any money. So the fact that this museum has fostered that kind of organization where various departments can go out and do money-making things to help support them really lets everybody contribute in a way that other places just don't.
I know you shy away from the limelight, but I have to say it's unavoidable to say you have a bit of a YouTube celebrity status. Are you gratified that really so many people care not just about the battleship itself, but really about the, whatever your drill down topic of the day is that you're talking about? I mentioned before I came into my office, we're talking about clocks, how you wind clocks on the ship, and that video, like tens of thousands of views. It seems like the more random or pedantic thing you talk about, the more views you get. But are you gratified by the amount of people who tune in and, taking yourself out of the equation for a second, but just about how many people care about what we're doing here, what you're doing here, what Libby's doing here, what our whole team is doing here, to spread educational awareness about the ship?
You have no idea how gratifying that is, because growing up, I was the only person who was interested in this sort of stuff. Certainly the only person my age. I didn't have any friends that were interested in battleships or even going wider than that, like history in general. So incredibly isolating. Even when I started working on museum ships almost 2 decades ago, many of my coworkers were just there to collect a paycheck and they didn't have the interest. But I started to meet a couple of people who did. But the YouTube channel has really showed me that there are actually hundreds of thousands of people like me out there. And I've met some very good friends who I otherwise would have never met because they live on the other side of the world or states away. And now I get to talk with them all the time, not through the channel, but like email back and forth and call and visit and stuff like that. And without the channel, I would have never known any of these guys who are into the same thing I am.
You're on YouTube talking every day about things that are going on the battleship. Is there anything specific you want the watchers, the listeners, the fans of this channel to know about the work that's being done day in and day out that maybe they don't necessarily see in the daily videos that you guys upload?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I feel like too many people out there get the impression that I'm the only person who works here and don't do anything around here.
I wouldn't go that.
We're going to an article on Wikipedia about whatever we're going to talk about that night, and I spend 15 minutes talking about it, and then that's my day. And then Libby has to spend 4 hours editing that into something passable, and our great maintenance department has to spend time keeping the ship looking good. So much happens around here staff-wise that I'm not involved in at all and could not possibly do if I wanted to. So I really hope that people realize that there is I wouldn't say a large team, but there is a significantly larger team here at the museum than me with equal or greater dedication to what I have that are making all this happen.
We look forward for a moment to, we're halfway through 2025. We're taping this in almost the middle of July. What can people expect for the second half of 2025 here at the Battleship?
I am, the thing that gets me the most excited is opening new spaces to show people, like making the tour route longer. At 1.5 miles, we already have the biggest tour route of any of the museum battleships. But there are a couple of spaces that I'd like to open that we started talking about it back in 2020, and then obviously took a back seat for a few years, and then dry docking happened and took an even longer back seat. We have a lot of former Marines who come back and visit the ship, so we'd like to open some of those Marine detachment spaces, which are on the aft end of Broadway. The volunteers have already gone through and painted them and restored them, and we've already started to put in an exhibit there that Libby's been working on. And part of that is we'll also be able to take people through aft main battery plot, which forward main battery plot is on guided tours right now, and the volunteers did a great job of restoring a lot of the equipment in there. But 90% of our guests don't get to see that. And that space really is the core of the ship, the brain, the part of the ship that's super sophisticated during the Great Depression when this thing is designed. So I'm excited to get people into that space. We want to open one of the ship's 2 massive refrigeration spaces. Really can't conceptualize just what those storage spaces look like and just how big they are. It feels like a cathedral when you're in there. So being able to open that up and show it off, and how do you feed 2,000 sailors for a month? Here's a fraction of those spaces. And that will also allow us to get folks into aft steering. So that will put a third of our 4 steering positions on the tour route. That's one of the number one questions that we get from guests, actually, is, well, where's the ship steered from? Did you go up to the level with all the big windows? Yeah. You didn't see the wheel there? No. Well, the wheel's inside of that 17-inch armored conning tower. So unless you look through the door just right, you don't see that that's where the ship is steered from. So by adding a couple more of these positions on there, we're giving people that thing that they're looking for. And that brings us to the last of the spaces that I'd like to open at some point in the near future, the '08 bridge, which was originally the primary con, which would allow people to go 3 decks higher than they can right now.
I wanted to just sort of do a little bit of rapid fire with you. So there's a number of questions I want to ask you, and I want you to just give me the answer, whatever's on the top of your head, okay? Favorite compartment on the ship?
I usually jokingly tell people my office, because I get to spend the least amount of time there. In terms of space that leaves me in awe, it's the Combat Engagement Center, both between the original equipment in there and just how much work our volunteers put into making that space look good. I'd say we've got a couple of spaces that are really pristinely restored. Looks like the crew just walked out. And we got a bunch of spaces that are pretty good, but we're still working to get them to that level. And then we got a bunch of spaces that we still have to restore. CEC is the one that absolutely leaves me in awe.
Favorite Battleship New Jersey?
You said rapid fire? Do this rapid fire. I'm going to go with Captain Peniston.
Good answer.
I've heard a lot of good stuff about him from the crew, guys who met him directly.
Obviously, his words are immortalized here.
Exactly. And the fact that the ship was being decommissioned and him pushing back against the Navy for doing that made him the only one of the ship's 19 commanding officers to not make admiral. That's inspirational. Stand up for what you believe in, and what you believe in is battleships. I think we can all get behind that.
Your favorite battle to study?
Ooh, that one definitely changes over time. I used to not like Leyte Gulf as a kid because it's just such an overwhelming amount of American superiority in that battle. But since working here and having to bone up on it more because it's probably the most famous battle that this ship participated in, I've really gained a new appreciation for it, for how hard the Japanese fought, even against those odds, and how close they came, honestly. It was a much closer battle than it had any right to be if you look at how many ships were there on each side.
What's your favorite ship? I'll say outside of the battleship.
Yeah, outside the Battleship New Jersey. The perfect ship was never built. I
Could have been the battle carrier.
It would definitely not have been the battle carrier. I really like the Lexington class battle cruisers. That's one of my favorite designs, and I really wish that.
Any reason in particular?
CC2 was going to be named Constellation.
Okay.
So even though CC1 became Lexington CV2 and CC3 became Saratoga CV3, was still a chance that Constellation could have been built as a battle cruiser.
There was a new Constellation coming, right? It's a frigate, is that right?
Under construction, yes.
Under construction, right. Okay. Do you have a favorite ship in today's Navy? A favorite ship, if you were in the Navy today, you would want to serve on?
I do love the Arleigh Burke class destroyers, and the newest generations of them are getting some really, really wild capabilities that should make them absolutely terrifying to any of our peer adversaries.
And you and Libby took a cool trip up to Bath, Maine, and of course we went for a short tour on the USS John Basselon when we were there for commissioning. Definitely a good choice. You have a favorite admiral who, let me ask you this two ways. Do you have your favorite admiral and then your favorite admiral from who spent time here?
Ooh, okay. This one's really out of left field. Follow along with me here. My favorite admiral of all time is the Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca.
Okay.
Who is primarily known for his generalship during the Second Punic War. Didn't involve ships at all. But after the Romans chased him out of Carthage, ends up being an admiral in the Seleucid Navy or something like that.
There'll be a lot of people Googling this right now. Yeah.
Threw pots full of venomous snakes at the enemy fleet.
That's what I've gone about it.
I think he would have been a really interesting person to sit down and have dinner with.
And your favorite admiral who maybe had this as their flagship or just came on board at some point?
I'd be remiss if I didn't give Admiral Willis Lee a shout out, but I think my favorite would have to be Raymond Spruance.
Spruance, another good answer.
He's really underrated. A highly, immensely competent person who just did everything in the background and didn't quite steal the spotlight the way Halsey did. But he also didn't make some of the command decisions that Halsey made.
And I'm in the middle of finishing Admiral Halsey's autobiography, and he's incredibly complimentary of Admiral Spruance during that time. And the switching between the Third Fleet and the Fifth Fleet. You have what's your favorite artifact here on board?
I think I'm going to go with the powder bag because that's the most recent, but 2 weeks ago would have been the drone, and 2 weeks before that was 1911. It could very well be those nuclear keys too. Oh, wait, I got it. The ship herself, the macro artifact.
Other than the ship itself, that's an easy
None
answer.
of the other artifacts matter without the macro
That is
artifact.
true. That is very true. Your favorite museum ship other than it?
Ooh, okay. There are so many great ones out there. I'll always have a soft spot for Taney. I was in charge of maintenance on her for 4 years before I came up here to the Battleship. And that ship, she's a 327-foot-long Coast Guard cutter. Again, built the same place, nearly the same time as New Jersey. But whereas the Battleship goes in and out of service throughout her career, Taney just continuously is in service, from looking for Amelia Earhart to surviving Pearl Harbor through the Okinawa campaign, and then the next 40 years doing her job day in and day out.
And then a last of the rapid fire questions. What's your proudest accomplishment from your time here?
Definitely working on the ship in dry dock, getting to be a part of that.
I think that's an answer that's shared amongst a lot of us. And so finally, I have to ask, this is obviously the WETSU podcast. Now, you and I are both civilians. We were not in the Navy. But do you have any WETSU moments that you think about from your time on board here that you'd like to share?
Oh, man, so many of them. So many of the staff and volunteers here just jump in 90 degrees out there today. And guys are volunteering to go out and give 90-minute long tours. Last week, we had a leak inside the ship, and the waters was coming through the rust, got really nasty color that was staining the entire deck. And one of the volunteers, without being asked, grabbed a mop and started cleaning it up. There's so many times like that. I think we all jump in and clean a bathroom when it needs to.
Ryan, anything else you want to mention that you haven't already talked about that you want the viewers here to know about either you or the ship itself or the work that we do here?
Watching our videos really helps support the museum. The guys who are super interested into this, watching it makes YouTube algorithm push it to other people who maybe didn't know they were into it. By watching it and figuring out, hey, there's an empty bracket over Ryan's left shoulder, and I've got the tool that goes there. Here, I'm donating it to the museum. Like those people, it feels like they're
the big wrench.
Yeah, exactly. It might feel like they're not doing much to support us, but just by watching it or by reaching out like that really, really helps us. Leaving a comment gives us the idea for tomorrow night's video, because we haven't thought about it yet, and we certainly haven't filmed it yet.
Ryan Szimanski, curator of the Battleship New Jersey, thank you for joining us on WETSU, and most importantly, thank you for what you do, and you and your team do here day in and day out, and for your dedication to our nation's most decorated battleship, the battleship that we all love, the Battleship New Jersey. Ryan, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Operating engineers are the men and women that move mountains. And the Engineers Labor Employer Cooperative, ELEC, puts them to work. They create opportunities for the men, women, and union signatory contractors of Local 825. Repaving our roads, keeping our homes bright and warm, and even building our favorite team stadium. We understand infrastructure. That's why ELEC and Local 825 are ready to get to work.